Hello and welcome to the Swim Swam podcast. I'm your host, Ben Dornan, and joining us today, he is a senior member of the Yale swim team, and he is now a two-time opinion contributor to the New York Times, most recent article published last week. It is Iszac Henig.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Iszac is a member of the Yale swim team, and back in 2021, was featured in kind of this New York Times anthology opinion piece where they reached out to people, I guess, and got contributors to talk about their time coming into the pandemic and during the pandemic, where people had the experience of coming out in one way or another as a queer person. So I'm wondering if we could just go back 2 years ago to that time and maybe before we get into the details of what was in that piece, maybe talk about how that came about, how the New York Times tracked you down to write about your story, your coming out story.
Yeah, actually, I was reading a different piece in the New York Times, during Pride Month, and at the bottom it was like, did you come out during the pandemic? Like, if yes, like share your story. And I was like, well, it's a pretty specific experience, but it's mine, so might as well send something in. Maybe I'll get a little quote or something, in a larger article. But they liked what I had to say, ended up reaching out for a longer contribution.
And is that the longer contribution that was in 2023 this year, or was there another one in between the two?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, to clarify, that longer piece was the piece that came out in that
Oh,
original
okay.
article.
If anyone hasn't read the piece, we kind of talked about it on Swim Swam, and it's still up on the New York Times, so feel free to check it out. But yeah, so the Times kind of accumulated stories of people who came out during the pandemic, and you wrote about, I think it was in April 2021, beginning to come out as a trans man to your family and your teammates and everything. So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about actually like writing that down and putting it out into the public. It's something that I know is a very personal experience for a lot of people. So what was it like to kind of get into that mindset and say, okay, I'm going to actually write this and make it public?
It sort of started with a PowerPoint to my parents, which was sort of a lot of terms and definitions, making sure that like when I said hey, like I'm trans, like they knew exactly what that meant for me. And then it was later like social media posts, emails and stuff to other people in my family. And honestly, part of sharing that experience for me really came from the place of like wanting to say like this is how people are adapting at this time. And then also like this is what it can mean to come out in a way that actually controls information in a way that's not as possible when you're just sort of like saying something, or if it were to just be a social media post. Like, to have different possibilities, it was a lot of figuring out exactly how I wanted to share that part of me with the people that I care about.
So kind of instead of, as you said, posting something on social media and then having maybe stuff being written about you, you were able to more control the original narrative, the narrative that was coming out before, kind of like from your own words. That that makes sense. And so as I was kind of reading yours and reading other people's, I found that there was a wide variety of different experiences, different ages, different identities that were writing on the Times. I was wondering if you, after it got published, or maybe before, I don't know how the timeline would have worked, but did you read others and kind of find a sense of community, or what was it like to read other people's stories that were placed alongside yours?
It was really cool. I remember reading the article when it first came out, first being like, oh my God, my words are in the New York Times. And then second of all, being like, okay, like these are really, really cool stories from a lot of really different people. And it was, I mean, I think that's one of the special things about sharing things to the public, is that like you get a chance to sort of hear other people's stories and, understand just how many different places people can come from.
From there, we can kind of transition. There's obviously a lot that happened in between the two pieces that you've written, but we'll definitely get into all of that. But the second piece that you wrote for the New York Times that was recently published in January 2023, which we've also covered on Swim Swam. So people can feel free to read both the New York Times and then Swim Swam piece about that. But this one was more about. I mean, I'm sure that you'll explain it better than me, but just to set it up, you wrote more about the decision to swim on the men's swim team at Yale, which you did this year after 2 or 3 years of swimming on the women's team. I forget how many years you swam. But yeah, I was wondering if you could maybe talk about how that one came up as well and how you got that piece started.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really cool opportunity. The editor reached out to me, and she was, saying like, "Hey, like I heard all about you in the spring, and like, wanted you to contribute a piece about, your decision to stay on the women's team, all 4 years." And I was like, "Well, that's so funny because I've actually made the decision to switch." And she was like, "That's actually a better story. Like, can you write that for us, please?" And I was like, "Yes, absolutely." I think it's a really cool thing to be able to share a story that can help change people's minds or help people understand trans athletes in general better. Obviously my experience is just mine, but it can, I feel like it can help. So she offered that to me and I ran with it.
And so you mentioned thinking about how your story could help or impact other trans athletes. Is that something that you were kind of consciously thinking about the entire time that you were writing it, like knowing that this is a personal story that you're telling for yourself, but also that it is going out into the world and it's going to be published. And so how did that figure into it, knowing the audience that you would probably attract with this story?
Yeah, it was definitely on my mind much more this second piece than the first one because of the exposure that I'd had in the spring of 2022 with, NCAAs and stuff and all of the news articles that came out. And so there was, a lot of it that was very much like, I want to share my authentic story. I want to share, exactly what the truth is and provide some of the emotional background that, people might respond to. People might, have a shared experience of it, like, oh yeah, like, I think everyone at one point has felt, out of place or, not feeling understood. And so I wanted to make sure that that was in there.
And that actually reminds me of something I wanted to ask before about the piece in 2021. Um, One portion of that, and also a portion of what you wrote in 2023, touched on mental health and the mental health struggles that you had even before the pandemic, but that maybe were identified in the pandemic. And I'm wondering if you feel, even though you're writing about kind of a unique experience as a trans individual, if you also kind of were thinking about the fact that a lot of people, as kind of became very widely talked about and publicized, did struggle with mental health during the pandemic, and even people who might have like very little similarities with your situation. Um, I feel like a lot of the coverage around the pandemic was around mental health and specifically athletes and mental health, kind of going from training 800 times a week to just being alone and having to figure out how to do workouts. So was that kind of a way that you felt like your story could connect to others, even who people who didn't have the same similar experiences to you?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope that people can find, you know, my experience, even in pieces relatable. And I think, yeah, I feel like it was really cool in some ways and also sort of really worrying how much the pandemic revealed about how little we take care of our mental health as a society.
So then going back to kind of the 2023 piece about deciding to swim for the men's team this year for this NCAA season, I found that there were some, like reading two side by side, there were some contrasting elements from 2021 versus 2023 about how you kind of envisioned your time on the women's swim team versus on the men's swim team, and feeling kind of differently about it 2 years apart. And I'm sure that there were so many other thoughts that you had and so many experiences that you had in between, but kind of just looking at the the two mindsets that you illustrated in them. I was wondering if you identified that contrast and how you kind of felt about that.
Yeah, I mean it definitely shifted. I think the piece in 2021 was before I had come back to campus. It was coming right out of being on a gap year. And so I didn't know what it was going to look like to be sort of myself and also, on the team at Yale. And so that was, you know, I think it was very hopeful. It was very much sort of like trying to anticipate all of the toughness that might happen, but not really having a grounding in exactly what that might look like. And then and you know, this most recent piece is like I'm now a year and a half into being myself on this team, and all of the changes that come with that, and all of the experiences that I've had. And so I think it makes, a lot of sense that there was a mindset shift, excuse me. And is, I think reflective of how the journey goes. I think I think we all, right, new data changes our minds. And so I'm just really glad that I had the opportunity to use that and act on it, and feel still very good about my contributions to the team.
Yeah. So just to kind of quote one piece, not to quote you back to you, but for listeners, you write in the 2023 piece, but the incongruence of existing as a man on a women's team was more difficult to navigate than I had expected. So I'm wondering if there was any portion of it that the experiences that you have in day-to-day life in what I guess we would call a binary society, if you find that there was a difference between kind of just existing in the world versus existing in a sporting environment where sports is very explicitly, this is a women's practice, this is a men's practice, women's change room, men's change room. I was wondering if there was kind of any specific challenges to being in those very very labeled settings, as a swimmer, if that kind of has anything to do with this decision.
Yeah, I mean, you can think about how much of our daily life is gendered, and especially, as you mentioned, in sports. So like, for example, walking around campus, my teachers were, familiar with me as a male student. People referred to me, as a male student, throughout my daily life. And then I would show up to the pool, and I would walk into the women's locker room, and for meets I would then put on what we would consider like a women's suit. And so I think it was those little moments where, like, 90% of my day was spent one way, and then, a very sudden shift into something else. It also, I think, was felt a little bit in the contrast with, even my own teammates, right? Like practicing in a Speedo, which is how I'm, far and away more comfortable, versus, all of them getting practice suits that, look different. And so I think it was just the little things that added up.
Right. And so you definitely mentioned in the piece those little things that did add up and all of the factors that went into to deciding to join the men's team. I was wondering if there's a specific moment that you can remember when you were like, this is the right decision to swim on the men's team, or if is that something that you remember doing, and then, or is it just kind of something that slowly built up over time, and then you had your meeting with coaches, or however it went down.
Yeah, I think it built up over time. It was, the strong contrast of, like, how I felt being around the women's team, and then, lifting with the men. And I was like, oh, like, wow, like this feels really nice. And then I think, I didn't have that one specific moment of like, oh, this was the right choice, until after the season had ended last year, and I was spending more time with the men's team, practicing more with the men, hanging out with them more. And I was like, oh yeah, like of course, this feels better. So yeah, just slowly.
Right. And then how would you describe the experience of actually having that conversation with your teammates, on both the women's team and the men's team, and then also with your coaches and, um, any of the supporting people in the Yale swimming environment? How did that process go? And did you find support? Did you find that it was a bit confusing, or how did that whole process roll out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm extraordinarily fortunate to have, really supportive coaches, really supportive teammates. And so that initial conversation with my coaches was essentially like, do you want to switch now? And I was like, no, I want to, fulfill my commitment that I set out for myself to the women's team. And then I will, switch next year when that makes a little bit more sense. There's a new class coming in anyway.
Right.
Um, you know, but they were, 100% on board. And as for my teammates, I think I've been really fortunate that they've celebrated me, as myself, um, the whole time.
Yeah, so I definitely got from the tone and the narrative in the 2023 New York Times piece that it is a decision that you seem happy with. But I'm wondering if how this year is going now that you have made the decision, have some months of training and the first few meets in the fall down. How do you feel about the decision, and are you feeling good about it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. No, it's really sort of night and day. How much better I feel just sort of existing. I think, there was a lot that I really enjoyed about the women's team. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, like just being able to sort of relax and not even think about it is really nice.
So I think that you had your mid seasons in November. It was the Ohio State, is that correct? Ohio State
Yeah.
Invitational. Um, And so I guess my next question is kind of about the actual swimming portion this year. I'm wondering how you prepared yourself to go into knowing that even if you hit the exact same times or a bit faster, because of the nature of men's swimming being faster, um, how you prepared for the fact that even hitting the same times, your placement, nationwide, school wide, everything like that would shift and would be different, I guess, this year. How did you prepare for that?
Yeah, I mean there's no sugarcoating it, right? Like I am not scoring the points I used to. I'm not as good comparatively, and I think I knew that going in. It's something that I've really sort of tried to shift the way that I think about my swimming and about my relationship with the team. I think I talked about it a little bit in the article of like sort of finding a new role. Um, and I think it's tough. That doesn't need to be understated either. I definitely don't enjoy coming in last, but it doesn't weigh on me as much as, I think it could, or as I think people maybe expect it to.
So I guess next up is a few more meets, a few more dual meets and try meets maybe, and then you have conference championships. Have you set any goals for Ivy Leagues this year, which you'll be competing in?
Yeah, so we have two meets left. We have HYP coming up in a little bit, and then we have Ivies. And because Ivies is a pretty select group, the rest of us will go to a different meet instead. And so right now, given that I, can contribute to the team not in the same way, I'm looking at the alternative meet as opposed to Ivies. I think,
Okay.
depending on how I swim at HYP, if I have an incredible swim, then maybe that's an opportunity. But honestly, I'm just really looking forward to rounding out my season and my entire swimming career with the guys that I really enjoy spending time around.
Right. So that was going to be my next question. Is this going to be your last season? Are you graduating from university this year?
Yeah. So done
Okay.
at Yale this year, done with swimming this year.
So what do you perceive to be next for you? Any in terms of academically and any connection to the sport moving forward? What do you see your connection to the swimming community being after this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think I spent a little bit of time coaching over my gap year, and I think depending on where I land, I would love to get back into that. It was really cool to give back to the swimming community in that way. And I think the nice thing about swimming is that you can do it for a while, even casually. And so after a couple months off, I wouldn't be surprised if I found myself back in the water.
So having just talked about kind of the end of the season and the conference season and all of that, if we look back to, I guess, a year ago right now, a year ago in February, um, and kind of the media storm that you discussed earlier, where there was just without like describing any of the media coverage, there was just a lot of coverage about, I would say, in particularly yourself and Leah Thomas, who is another trans athlete at Penn, um, both of you competing and just kind of a wide spectrum of coverage on that topic and being a subject of that topic and being written about probably a lot more content wise than you have in the past. I was wondering if you could characterize what it was like to be kind of the subject of so much media coverage um, for an extended period of time for a couple of weeks there.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. I think a lot of the articles try to be really positive. Interviews I gave, and that was really cool. But it's really difficult to see yourself mischaracterized or vilified in the media, and so I think like that part was challenging for sure. But at the same time, I try and always be really intentional with my words and with my actions, and I think that ultimately like people are gonna report on what they're gonna report on, and I'm gonna sort of live my life.
So I guess part of that was the fact that you did go to Ivy Leagues and you won a medal there. So you were having your own swimming experiences and I guess reaching goals, maybe not reaching some goals, and just doing your own thing at the same time. You were swimming. So was it hard to kind of separate the fact that these media narratives that sometimes are about your swimming, sometimes stray from not being about swimming at all? Was it hard to kind of pay as much attention as you'd like to and want to the media coverage while also knowing that you're an athlete and that you're representing your school and that you're doing all of these things? Was it hard to kind of balance those two things?
There are definitely times where I was like, this is sort of too much. I have to just, turn my phone off and put things away and come back to them later.
Right.
Um, but I think as any sort of university student would tell you, like you learn how to time manage, you learn how to balance. I think it's just like anything else.
I guess we've discussed a lot about kind of like the last 2 years from 2021 to 2023. I'm wondering if we can go back a little bit further and just kind of touch on how you got into swimming, how you got into age group swimming, and where your swimming journey began to kind of go non-chronologically here in this interview, but maybe talk about your early swimming days. So when did you start swimming competitively?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually a cute story. So the first team I ever joined was when I was 4, a little summer league team at a local recreation center. And the team was the Dolphins. And the summer before, I was like, Mom, like I want a dolphin suit. I want the suit with Dolphins on it. And she was like, well, you have to be on the team in order to get that. And I was like, okay, so sign me up. you know, let's do this thing. So the next summer she put me in, and I really discovered like a love for it early on, and then that led me to competitive swimming starting when I was about 9. Um, and that's where really things took off.
And so was there, I guess a lot of children kind of compete in multiple different sports, do different sports. Were you doing that for any period of time and kind of juggling different sports?
Yeah, actually, I played basketball for a while growing up. I also played water polo up until about freshman year of high school.
Okay. And was there a moment that, I mean, I feel like I had a moment where you were like, okay, other sports are fun, other activities are fun, but I'm going to be a swimmer and I'm going to commit to this. I assume that a path that leads you to swim Division 1 at Yale would definitely, you'd have to kind of focus and specialize. So was there a moment when you were like, okay, I am a swimmer?
Yeah, it was about 8th grade, and I was considering quitting swimming in favor of water polo, which,
Okay.
by the way, would have been a terrible decision. I'm a very, very solid swimmer, and I'm a very bad water polo player. But I sort of sat down and was like, okay, like what do I really want from this? And that's what led me, to focus on swimming through high school.
So then, so you did your age group years, and then before going to Yale, which you went to Yale in 2018 and started swimming there, the 2016 Olympic trials. I don't know if this is something that you're asked about a lot, but um, I guess could you talk a little bit about your experience heading into Olympic trials and then kind of explain how the experience went at that meet?
Yeah, I mean, it was a really cool experience. It was something I'm, very glad I was able to do. I mean, it's a crazy meet for anyone who hasn't been. It's, a total production. There's a ton of people around. There's lots of different rooms and pools and things happening. And, at 15, I was just super overwhelmed with it. But, did my best to sort of say, like, I'm gonna swim, as best I can. I was super nervous. So when I hopped up on the blocks for my singular event at the meet, I think it was day 6 or 7, and I had like been there just kind of hanging out, waiting. I ended up like kind of moving on the block after the take, and so got DQ'd. Which was super tough at the time, and now looking back is something that's really kind of fun to laugh at, of just like, of course I spent 7 days and got DQ'd in the shortest event possible.
It's kind of gone from a tragic experience to kind of just a fun story to tell, I guess. So the
Yeah.
100 freestyle was your only event at that meet.
It was actually
So
just
I
the
guess
50.
the 50
Yeah.
free. Okay, right.
Yeah.
So did you go away from that meet and kind of think, in 4 years I want to come back, and did you set your sights on 2020 trials, which of course became 2021 trials?
Yeah, originally, yes, that was the plan. And then I think with a lot of the mental health stuff with the pandemic and things changing around it, it no longer became something that was going to be feasible. So didn't end up qualifying for 2020 trials, but I had other things going on.
Right. After 2016, that's about 2 years before, or I guess less than 2 years, from trials to September of 2018 when you joined Yale. I'm wondering how you got to Yale and how you narrowed down your options and decided that you wanted to swim with Yale. Did you do like a recruiting trip, or did you kind of just go in blind? How did that decision come about?
Yeah, so I took actually an initial visit with my mom in January of 2017, just to sort of check out the campus. And then, did the whole recruiting process, was talking to a number of different schools, took 3 official visits, and enjoyed my time at Yale the best. And so decided to commit. I really, felt like I had connected with some of the team members and really, really liked the coaching staff. So.
And so I guess just to kind of close out the interview here and end on whatever note you take us in. I'm wondering if there's any kind of message or overall like thesis statement of all of the experiences that you've had, from dating back to when you started swimming to coming to Yale and swimming for Yale and coming out as a trans man. I'm wondering if there's any overarching kind of lessons you've taken away, or anything like that you feel can define your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I think if I had to sort of try and put a pin in like exactly what this is all meant, is like, how powerful sports is for, inclusion and acceptance and feeling connected to communities. And then also how important emphasizing those things are, to make sure that is true for everyone. I think there's a lot going on right now in the country that is very negative and very divisive. And I think that it would be, really cool if we could take a sort of more compassionate view at what sports can mean, and what, being a good teammate is, what being a good athlete is, because I think, everyone deserves to have the chance at the kind of community and learning that sports can provide.
You've been listening to the Swim Swam podcast. Stay tuned for new episodes every week. You can take Swim Swam podcast on the go by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Look for links in the description below, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos as well.